In 2005, it was the 50th anniversary of Teilhard's death, and there were 1,000 people who came to the UN to celebrate him. So he is very much alive. The next day, 1,400 people came to the cathedral in New York of St. John the Divine to celebrate him. There were 1,000 people for Thomas Berry's memorial in 2009. These are thinkers who have a vibrancy right into the present. And I did want to just underscore that Jack Hott is speaking for the 60th anniversary of the Teilhard's death this spring, May 16th. And we'd be delighted to have anyone come, but also to join the Teilhard Association. I want to also just mention that the papers that you're hearing here, the summaries of them, are online for the conference participants and chairs and so on. Eventually, we will have a book. I think Orbis is very interested in publishing these papers. Brian Swim is very keen as well, so we're working with him on that. I also just wanted to say, John is president of the Teilhard Association and has been kept it going for a long time. Brian is vice president along with me. So this has been a background for this whole work. That's the point. You see, of Teilhard has a huge influence in Journey of the Universe. And what Thomas wanted to do was take the human phenomenon, which came out in English in 1960 and then was retranslated by Sally Webster as the human phenomena. He wanted to take that massive work and make it into story, into something that was accessible for humans around the planet. And that is one of Thomas's great contributions, the need for a new story, how stories motivate us and so on. But an integrated story that's not materialistic, because what we are inheriting is a materialistic story without interiority, without a sense of a spiritual vision. And that is why, as the panelists said, we are in some of the ecological trouble that we are in. So I just wanted to draw forward what was said so well about the significance of Teilhard ecologically and otherwise. And I wanted to also to say that Thomas and Brian Swim worked on that vision for Universe Story that came out in 1992. They worked 10 years to tell that story, to take this Teilhardian vision into story. And then about 20 years later, we did the Journey of the Universe. So this is a long movement, but has incredible relevance for where we are ecologically, environmentally, etc. And then finally, I want to say Thomas's audio, many of his audio talks and his visual talks are now up on the Thomas Berry website, thanks to a number of friends who've worked on them from Canada. And so you can listen to him or see him on this website. And finally, as you know, thanks to Robert Ellsberg at Orbis and Matt and Christine Riley, with the help, this new selection of Thomas's writings is available. But I want to draw special attention to a wonderful book that also came out a little bit earlier this year and is now available in paperback, that Heather Eaton edited, The Intellectual Journey of Thomas Berry. There are flyers downstairs. Those of you who are in this book, will you just raise your hands, because there are a number of you who've done essays in this book. And that was years in the making. It's a wonderful collection of essays. So, without further ado, we're going to hear from the panelists on their reflections on Thomas Berry, beginning with Heather Eaton from St. Paul's University in Ottawa. Thank you, Heather.
Okay, thanks, Mary Evelyn. My comments here are not the same as the paper online. The paper online is just an introduction to Christianity. This is more on Thomas Berry. Cannot hear me.
It takes a moment.
Has the moment passed? Can you hear me?
It's getting better.
All right. So just to say 30 seconds about Thomas Berry, this is a very insightful, perceptive, original thinker with a vast intellectual expertise. He was a Passionist priest, a historian of religions. He focused on the intricacies of religious imagination and religious experience. Very, very sophisticated thinker. He was preoccupied by ecological devastation and how to respond effectively. So I have 3 points. And the first is exteriority. How much can we know about what is outside of ourselves? So outward journey. So this quest of expansiveness, how do we understand the expansiveness of the world, of the earth, of the cosmos, of time and space? How's that? Closer. Oh my goodness. It's a good thing I'm going to talk about intimacy because I'm going to have So there's a whole tradition in Christianity and other religions about people who seek to understand how far can we know. So Thomas Aquinas, Hildegard von Bingen, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, Thomas Berry, these are people in the Christian tradition. And they sought to understand the most comprehensive context. So the origins, extent of reality, parameters, largeness, and this is eventually a cosmological question. So this human quest to look outward, to touch these boundaries of reality, is what I'm calling exteriority. The pushing of our consciousness outward to seek to understand. And for Thomas Berry, this means that we have to start at the beginning. So we have to start with a notion of time. To understand anything, we have to start at the beginning. So he learned science. He understood time and space. And this, of course, led him to study cosmology, the origins of the universe, out of which came the Earth. So we know more now, as a human species, than we ever have about cosmology. This immensity of the cosmos, which is daunting and can feel quite impersonal. But what is less evident is the coherence, that the universe is integral. That for Berry he could see, as did Teilhard de Chardin, there's a unity, which is not a uniformity, it's a wholeness. And scientific data now supports this religious insight. So this whole realm, these vast exterior realms, have patterns. So there's an interconnectedness to the fabric of space and time and matter and energy. So Berry talked a lot about developmental sequences, transformations, evolution, complexification. But for him it also meant interconnectedness, that the material, the physical, and the psychic spiritual dimensions were intimately connected to each other. They're entangled, that energies and processes and matter are part of each other. And so we look to theories of emergent complexity today to explain some of that. Which means that the cosmos is not a context, it's not an unfolding, it's not a development like an embryo, it's not a potential, it's more like a becoming. And this becoming is not linear and not determined, it's creative, dynamic, it's a process, and it has an orientation. The universe is becoming more in the same way the Earth becomes more complex, interactive, entwined, vibrant, and intense. And the best image is that the cosmos is alive. Cosmogenesis, that's the best image. So Teilhard talked a lot about the transformation of the atoms to molecules, that these new arrangements actually produce another dimension to reality. That reality intensifies. It's not unfolding, it's intensifying. And reality becomes more complex. The patterns become more complex. And these are the processes of the Earth, the universe, the biosphere. So the premise of this exterior quest to know the boundaries of reality as we know it, this is not new in human history, but the knowledge we have is new. And the undeniable conclusion is that we are not in the process, we are the process. We are part of the universe. The universe formed us. So simple, and yet it's not simple at all. It's not intelligent design, and this is also distinct from Teilhard de Chardin's teleology. We're not just embedded in evolutionary planetary processes, we are a self-conscious element of the biosphere. We are a living element of a vibrant cosmos. Or as was said earlier, the Earth, the universe, is reflecting back on itself. And here, exteriority becomes interiority. my second point. The dynamics of within, interiority. For Teilhard and for Berry, everything has a within of things. With Teilhard, everyone always asked him, are you doing spirituality or are you doing science? Because we simply can't cope with the blend. When he talked about the creativity of atoms and molecules, when he talked about atoms were pre-life, that matter and life are on a continuum, and energy and spirit and telos are also on a continuum. Teilhard talked about this unity in the interior, which is not observable, but it has to be the dynamic that transforms to increasing complexity and rich and more concentrated interiority. So he has his lovely words, luminosity, cosmogenesis, noosphere, the within of things, and he drove people crazy because people can't understand these concepts in this way. Berry's very similar. He talks a lot about the numinous. He talks about interiority as a dynamic of the cosmos, of the earth, that life emerged from the within of things, the interiority of the planetary processes. So this inner journey of the planet to interiority has produced consciousness, self-consciousness, symbolic consciousness, emergent interiority. The biosphere differentiates. We have subjectivity. Creativity is embedded in the process, in this within of things. The inner expansion of interiority has been a process of the planet, and it is incarnated in humans and other animals. So what we call our sensibilities, emotions, intuition, cognition, insights, religious experience, these are all part of interiority. This is an area of great vitality, elasticity, and profound importance. So Berry links exterior and interior journeys. Not that they are one, but that they are intimately connected. The evolutionary processes that govern the earth, the universe, the biosphere, and human emergence also govern interiority. But here our language is inadequate because our modes of inquiry are handicapped. The intellectual tools that measure and define, analyze, critique, deconstruct hegemonies, while all very useful, have limits. And Berry understood very well that these intellectual processes, while valuable, neither come from nor speak to the depth of human interiority. He had an appreciation for many modes of knowing: dreams, stories, imagination, poesis, symbolic consciousness. And he would say this is the area that is the most potent, creative, fertile, and profound realm of human activity. So the human pursuit for understanding the universe is both an exterior and interior quest. But the exteriority of the dynamics of the universe are appreciated through interiority. There is an inner intimacy, an inner continuity in our understanding of the universe. So Gaston Bachelard has this beautiful expression of intimate immensities. Religions, when functioning well, are a blend of intense interiority and extend to the limits of exteriority. There's an alignment between breadth and depth. And this is one place where Berry, I would say, is misunderstood, because this is one of his key meanings of the new story, that it is in interiority that we experience the universe. This continuity between depth knowledge of the living universe and depth inner awareness of expanding interiority. And it was here that Berry saw a way forward to respond to the ecological crisis. If we can absorb the insights of the living cosmos and these processes and patterns of cosmogenesis in the universe, in the earth, in ourselves, if we can absorb this, then our horizons expand, our awareness heightens, and our religious sensibilities intensify. And this convergence is a revelatory religious insight or a spiritual awakening, and it transforms our psychic orientation. And this is the project of Journey. My last comment is cultural orientation. So if we say that our psychic and cultural orientations are connected, they're currently not aligned with the dynamics of the biosphere. So I'm going to quote from Thomas Berry. The deepest crisis experienced by any society are those moments of change when the story becomes inadequate for meeting the survival demands of the present situation. Tom spoke of story. Individuals have stories, cultures, religion, and they codify and pattern our experiences, their meaning systems, and it's within narratives. But in one sense, it's an extremely simple idea. What do we do when we get lost? When we're walking or driving or cycling? Well, we stop and we say, well, where are we? And who's got a map? And how do we get oriented? And what are our reference points? Knowing very well a map is not a territory. I think it's not really rocket science to say our cultural and religious maps are not functioning. If I say, how are we sure? Well, let's look at what's happening to the earth. Look at our economic systems, civic violence, the war on terror, the war on women, Boko Haram, consumerism, poverty. We now can safely say that climate change has anthropogenic causes, but action plans are gridlocked among competing interests. So we have a story from Thomas Berry, an idea. And this is debatable, and it is debated, but I want to suggest that the debate about which story is not as fruitful as a discussion about a story out of which horizon. What stories guide us for the future, for our era? Is it the techno-cyborg story? What story gives us exterior and interior orientation to integrate what we know about where we are, who we are, which I think is cosmogenesis, and integrates the depth of human sensibilities and cultivates interiority? What brings these exterior and interior, outward and inward journeys together? Last comment is, what could be some implications for Christianity? This is a new religious moment, but it isn't really a moment of new religions. So there's quite a difference there to understanding what is being invited, how religions are being invited to transform themselves. From Berry's point of view, religions are being invited to become more, to intensify, to complexify, but in the context of a cosmology of religions, to reinterpret themselves in a living cosmos. So Christian themes, creation, revelation, sacrament, exodus, divine presence, salvation, eschatology, justice, sacrifice, these are all themes within the Christian tradition that are rich. But they're also possibly dynamics within the process of the universe, and they could be reinterpreted and resituated as such. And if this happens, then our orientation changes. We have new insights, and religious insights intensify. But it's always Berry who reminds us it is the universe and it is the earth in all its complexity and majesty, diversity, and exigencies that educates and orients the spiritual sensitivities of the human species. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Now we have Anne-Marie Dalton. I just want to mention these are two of the leaders from Canada, along with Steve Dunn at the University of Toronto and Steve Sharper and Christine Vonden. We have a whole contingent from Canada that's been working with Thomas Berry's ideas for 25, 30 years. So we're delighted to have them with us. And Anne-Marie Dalton from St. Mary's University in Halifax.
I want to start by saying, even for those of you who are chefs or cooks or whatever, this is a reduction of a paper to fit the time. And the full paper will be posted. I want to argue in these few comments that one of the ways to look at Thomas Berry's proposal of a new story, the universe story as it is presented by Brian and Thomas Berry, and the film Journey of the Universe, is to consider them methodologically. So what is the goal? What is trying to be accomplished by these pieces of art? And how do they function? So I would say that one of the major goals, if not the goal, is to enhance our moral landscape, to include ecological values, care for the earth. And how? What is the function? To redirect human desire within our moral landscape to include ecological values in a conversion of the human psyche in which cosmological, ecological imagery informs moral decision-making. And I think that process can best be understood in terms of ecopoetics, which I'll mention a little further for those not familiar with that. The result of my wondering about these goals and functions and reflecting on the pieces of art with which we're presented is to understand what's happening as an incision, an incising, or a cutting into what we might call habitus. And I would like to just read from my paper a short description of habitus, just to keep me on topic. The word habitus received its first systematic treatment in the work of Thomas Aquinas, following usage by Aristotle. Habitus, for Aquinas, referred to the state of possessing or having, habere, an acquired trained disposition to engage in certain modes of activity when encountering particular objects or situations. Habitus was that which grounded the disposition to act morally or to be a virtuous person. The nature of one's habitus relied on the training one received in relation to the moral and religious life. So it would include things like ritual that were being discussed earlier. The term has a history of development in meaning in the social sciences in the study of adaptation. Recently, it has regained some of its original meaning as the study of human genetics has led to refocusing on the ways in which human environments and practices affect the very psychophysical operations of our brains, emotions, nervous systems, and so on. What is relevant to this discussion is the concept that we can recreate the habitus and do so continually. Changing practices and surroundings can affect the ways in which we create our moral lives. The habitus in which we live, in turn, recreates us in significant ways. I would like to just pause here for a moment to read two short quotations from Thomas Berry in order to connect this to the methodology I'm talking about. The first one will be familiar to all of you who know Berry's work. It was an early afternoon in May when I first wandered down the incline, crossed the creek, and looked over the scene. The field was covered with white lilies rising above the thick grass. A magic moment. This experience gave me something that seems to explain my life at a profound level. It was not only the lilies. It was the singing of the crickets and the woodlands in the distance and the clouds in a clear sky. This early experience has become normative for me through the entire range of my thinking. And the second one was in an introduction to a book that he did. This book was by Dorothy MacLean and Kathleen Thornod, To Honor the Earth. Even though we foster ecological and environmental movements throughout the planet, even though we seek to save the rainforests and to renew the regions we have devastated, none of this will ultimately succeed unless it expresses a true intimacy with this larger Earth community. I would like to note in these quotations the intimacy of the language. Nature sensitivity was part of the habitus of Thomas Berry and of his life. It was, in a sense, the radical ordinary of his life. The radical ordinary, as described by Stanley Hauerwas, but for Berry included nature. Along with this, the breadth of his scholarship in world religions, in Aboriginal religions, and in particular, his own reading of Augustine and Aquinas led him, or enabled him, to open up this intimacy to the rest of us. to the reader and the listener. And it led to his proposal of a new story, which for me is an eco-poetical telling of the scientific story of the cosmos. And I would just like to go back to read a piece from my paper, if I can find the right page, on eco-poetics. In its ethical dimension, eco-poetics examines the function of language as a vehicle of transformation. In his book, Eco-Poetics, The Language of Nature, The Nature of Language, Scott Knickerbocker, I'd love to have that name, explains, environmental poets see themselves as curbing the excesses of post-structuralism, hermetically sealed textuality, that ignores the connection of the social, cultural, and physical environment. End of quote. Neil Everden, another eco-poet, has claimed environmentalism without poetry is merely regional planning. Hence, eco-poetic language or figuration, meaning poems, metaphors, stories, and other intentional forms, calls on the power of the imagination to recreate our manner of being in the world. It is, in a sense, a reaction against a techno-scientific world in which the humanities are confined to practices of leisure. In a manner akin to feminism, it challenges the dominant ideology of dividing the world according to dualistic categories. Poetic expression is not separate from science or politics any more than nature can be separated from something or other. Oh, from human life. Okay. Or our backyard can be immune from pollution. Heidegger compared poetry to a dwelling place, or better, to the act of dwelling, because he claimed poetics creates presence, a form of being, not merely a representation, such as a map, but not in the way Heather intended it. Okay, and finally, I'll just sum up. And I would like to sum up with some comments around the Journey of the Universe film. The Journey of the Universe film is a continuation, in more contemporary idiom, of the new story, bringing into our intimate gaze and hearing the far reaches of the larger universe. And actually, in my paper, I show how for Barry, this link that's made between lilies of the field and grass and so on, and the larger majesty of the universe. So in this film, the universe becomes a story in which we are invited to share the agency of emergence with the stars, the solar system, the elements, the planet Earth, and all the creatures that appear here. Our agency is enlarged, but our universe is brought home. In the words of one of my students on seeing the film, I quote, "I felt like the universe was my house." It is this kind of re-imaging and relanguaging that refits our moral home, our habitus. It does not replace all the moral constructions of the habitus, which is always fluid and porous, even in traditional understanding. However, it incisors. It cuts through our established psychic flow, our river of images, if you like, that ground our moral life, with new images to redirect our desire. Desire needs artistic imagery, an imaginal flow in the psyche that supports our day-to-day practice of living. That, I believe, is how the new story, the universe story, and the journey of the universe work. The new story belongs to habitus. The transformation required in a time of ecological crises calls for a new engagement through new practices of intimacy with the others in the natural world. Barry evoked the force of an eco-poetic form, the story of the universe, to engender and deeply ground such practices. This is what the primal peoples did, according to Barry, and they practiced the story in rituals. They lived in the radical ordinary of relatively wild nature and gave it poetic expression in ritual, in language, in story. It required and still requires poetic expression because there is no other way to practice a conversation with a tree, a lily, a cricket, a rock, a moon, or the Milky Way. There is no better way to capture the mysterious and numinous evolving process of the universe but in the poetics of story. Here is the vision of an eco-democracy in which the entire universe, especially in its earthly aesthetic expression, must be engaged and voiced and practiced if we are to evoke the psychic energy needed to face the present ecological challenges. The journey of the universe is to be enacted, lived in as habitus. Thus, it contributes to the recreation of an ecological consciousness, redirecting human desire toward moral norms required for the immense challenge of our time. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. And Matt Riley, I want to just introduce as one of our most important assistants with the Forum on Religion and Ecology. He's a student of Laura Kearns. We're working on Lynn White for his PhD. But in particular, downstairs you can see where he has put together, with Brian Swim and myself, but Matt's work in creating a curriculum for Journey of the Universe that brings together the book, the film, and the educational series of conversations has been incomparable. Also working with us on high school teachers and Journey and so on. And as I've mentioned, the book, and now on online classes with us here at Yale in Religion and Ecology. So we really want to thank Matt for his presence and his work on all of this. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. This book is an invitation to a journey into grandeur, write Brian Swim and Mary Evelyn Tucker on the opening page of the Journey of the Universe book. Humans have, they observe, a, quote, desire to journey and to experience the depths of things, end quote. But what does it mean to journey? Where is humanity going? Thomas Berry observed that humanity finds itself to be uprooted at this moment in the story of the universe. We are alienated and at odds with the cosmos, our home. We are wanderers, bodies seemingly set adrift in the vastness of the cosmos as we travel without reference to our origin or knowledge of our end. In some senses, we are planetary beings. To be planetary bids us to recall the origin of the term planets, the lost wanderers of the celestial realm observed by the ancient Greeks, literally planetes, or wanderers in the original Greek language. But perhaps we are not lost. Wandering in this sense can be understood as purposeful wandering, as journeying. Today, I look into Berry's writings to explore the participatory nature of wandering and the great celebratory experience of the depths of things that journeying can bring us towards. Berry's own life, one might observe, was marked by journeys. Early in his life, when he was a young boy, his family moved to the edge of town in Greensboro, North Carolina. Then, at just 11 years old, Berry remembered how he, quote, wandered down the incline, crossed the creek, and looked out over the scene, end quote. Before him lay a field of white lilies. Beyond it was a woodland and clouds floating in a blue sky, much like Anne-Marie described for us. He described it as a magical moment, a moment when he was transformed and his entire life was moved to reorientation. It was in this act of wandering, in this small boyhood journey, where his own understanding of the great work began. It was also in this place where his personal journey came full circle. Some 70 years later, Berry returned to his childhood home in Greensboro, and there he reflected back on his life and continued in his writing. Looking beyond Berry's personal life, it's illuminative to examine Berry's use of the term journey in his writings. In this discussion, I borrow from Thomas Tweed's theory of religion to propose 3 ways in which Berry's use of the term journey can be understood. First, journey as itinerary. Second, journey as travel itself. And third, journey as symbol. The first way in which Berry used the metaphor of journeying is to describe an itinerary or a suggested route. In this sense, the term journey is used to describe a plan for travel, a proposed set of normative guidelines for action, or a plan for personal and spiritual growth. Journeys as itineraries, therefore, can be geographically and metaphorically directional. For instance, Berry frequently used the metaphor of the Exodus to describe how humanity might transform its collective worldviews in order to figuratively journey out of the terminal Cenozoic period and into new modes of human Earth flourishing in the Ecozoic. Journeys, as we see, are therefore more than just descriptions of and plans for physical journeys. One can also conceive of them in terms of guidelines for moral actions and as proposed sets of ethical principles. Berry's telling of the new story is perhaps the most salient example of this. It is a story about where humanity has been and where it is going. It is, in a sense, an itinerary for a great transformative journey across all scales, the physical scale, the spiritual, and also at the emotional, psychological, and intellectual levels. To borrow language from John Grimm and Mary Evelyn Tucker's book, Ecology and Religion, the new story provides a mode for orienting, grounding, nurturing, and transforming. Journeys, as evidenced in Berry's writings, can be further understood in a second way, as embodied travels, or as movements through time and space. In regards to the journey of the universe itself, he spoke of the transformation of the cosmos on a grand scale. And I quote, "We are speaking here of the more comprehensive journey of the emergent universe, a unique and irreversible journey of galactic systems, of Earth formation, of living forms, of human community, a journey passing through a sequence of unpredictable discontinuities," end quote. But we must exercise caution when speaking of journey only in terms of temporal development or evolutionary development. Berry noted that for the Western world, the basic symbolism is more temporal than spatial, and that the evolutionary journey of the universe has largely been understood within this time developmental context. But, warned Berry, preferencing the temporal over the spatial has led to alienation in the Western world. He contrasted these temporal understandings of journeying with a spatial understanding found in Chinese philosophy and religion. So here, journey can be understood not just as a journey through space, as traveling, but also as a grounding and an orienting in a physical location set meaningfully in spatial relation with the cosmos itself. Journeys can also be understood in a third way as symbols or symbolic representations. This way of understanding the metaphor of journey in Berry's writings can denote narratives of journeys and ritual enactment of travels and transformations. These can have an emotive or a spiritual character to them. Most notably, Berry drew upon the heroic archetype and the symbolic journey of the shaman as a means of knowing or of connecting to something larger. From these examples of symbolic journeys, Berry established the need for and efficacy of the new story. In his words, quote, "The story represents a transition in human awareness from the universe as cosmos to the universe as cosmogenesis. It represents a shift in the spiritual path from a mandala-like journey to the center of an abiding world to a great irreversible journey of the universe itself as the primary sacred journey. This journey of the universe is the journey of each individual being in the universe. So the story of the great journey is an exciting, revelatory story that gives us our macrophase identity, the larger dimension of meaning that we need," end quote. The new story, therefore, is journeying in all three of these regards. It is an itinerary or a plan for ethical and communal transformation. As a journey from the great flaring forth to the emergence of the Ecozoic is a journey that is actual travel through reality in both its spatial and temporal aspects. And finally, as a symbolic journey, is a spiritual transformation and a reconnecting of the human with the more than human. Journeying, however, is also something greater than the sum of these three parts. The journey described in the new story can be, in other words, all of these things and more. Allow me to conclude by returning to the Journey of the Universe book. There, Swim and Tucker observe that in the quest to become a planetary presence, humanity has learned to live off the Earth, but we haven't yet learned to live on the Earth. Intimacy has been abandoned for progress. We are finding ourselves in the midst of a vast transition, they write. How are we to respond? With what shall we navigate? If humanity is to enter into the ecozoic, I suggest, then perhaps we must do more than wonder. We must learn to journey. To end this brief presentation, I draw upon Barry's poignant words that are reprinted in Evening Thoughts. In this talk, he invited his audience to, quote, recall the ancient law of hospitality, whereby the wanderer was welcomed, end quote. Just as Ulysses, even after the greatest of struggles, was welcomed home from his long travels, Barry suggested that we too will be welcomed home by the universe in our own journeys. In his words, as a final reflection, I would suggest that we see these early years of the 21st century as the period when we discover the great community of Earth, a comprehensive community of all living and non-living components of the planet. We are just discovering that the human project is itself a component of the Earth project, that our intimacy with Earth is our way to intimacy with each other. Such are the foundations of our journey into the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. I can't help interjecting here with your pun on wandering and wondering. When we were in Samos and it was late at night and we're filming that scene where Brian is on that boat as we're about to leave, we're all on the boat at first and then we get off and get the angle and so on and so forth. And that boat went around and around that harbor because David Kennard, the director of the film at that moment, was so determined to get all the right angles. He's the one who made the Cosmos series. But by the time he's saying, wonder will guide us, and the idea was like Ulysses to go off on a journey, you see. But it was freezing cold, and we were glad to get off that boat. The wandering and the wondering. We are so happy to have with us Peter Ellard from Siena College, and Peter has spent a great deal of time in the Harvard Archives, which was set up a number of years ago. Margaret Berry has been instrumental in getting those archives very, very complete. Her niece, Ann Berry, is here, and Irene, maybe you'll raise your hands back there. And we're delighted to have you with us. But Peter has done a great deal of work on Thomas over the years and a wonderful partner in this work. So welcome to Peter.
The turning point in Disney's 1994 animated film, The Lion King, is when the wayward lion cub, Simba, in a moment of crisis, looks up into the constellations, which morph into the face of his father, and we hear the bellowing voice of James Earl Jones say, "Simba, you have forgotten who you are." It's even a little more menacing since it's also the voice of Darth Vader. Simba was experiencing an identity crisis, and it is fitting for our purposes that it was the stars that revealed this to him. Thomas Berry and the new story offer the same analysis. We have forgotten who we are. Berry, the new story, and the journey of the universe have a very clear answer to this question. At Siena, where I teach a course called Religion and the Environment. At the onset, we review a whole host of reasons that scholars have given as to why we found ourselves in our current environmental crisis. We look at the role of patriarchy, studying Sally McFaig and Carolyn Merchant. We look at Lynn White and his critics. We look at the Green Pope and the Green Patriarch and their critics. We look at Leopold and Schweitzer, capitalism and consumerism. And then I introduce Berry, with the notion that the problem is at heart a cosmological one. The thesis for that section of the course is the following. The ecological crisis is a result of a cosmological identity crisis. We destroy the planet in part because we don't know who we are. For Berry, until we resolve the cosmological crisis and fully embrace the new story, we cannot hope to solve the ecological crisis. And that speaks a little bit to Ilya's question from before. We exist on many levels. We exist on the level that you see me now and I see you. We also exist, that is, we have an identity on the cellular level. Microbiologists tell us that there are 372 trillion cells in our body. Actually, that's not quite right. Let me rephrase that. Part of my identity is that I exist as 372 trillion cells. That's one way of expressing who I am. Smaller than that, we exist on the molecular level. On the atomic level, we exist as 7 times 10 to the 27th power number of molecules. These molecules from 26 different atoms would be written out as 1 followed by 27 zeros. We also exist smaller than that on the quantum level. These levels of our existence, the quantum, the molecular, the cellular, and the human that you see before you, we might think of as the micro level in its various forms. We also, however, exist on the macro level, including the level which Berry calls the great self. This bringing together of the macro and micro is part of Berry's challenge to us. On the macro level, we exist as the Earth itself, as the galaxy itself, and as the universe itself. We are, as Berry often wrote, the universe conscious of itself. We are the universe expressed in a unique conscious way. For Berry, all that is and all that will ever be in the phenomenal world was present at the moment of the Big Bang, the great elastication, the primordial flaring forth. This includes spirit, mind, consciousness, and that which some would call a soul. This psychic spiritual aspect of the universe was present from the beginning, and as is all that makes up our creativity and our destruction. We are 4.5 billion years old in our Earth self. We are 13.7 or so billion years old in our universe self, our great self. This is not theoretical, and this is not metaphoric. We're not talking in similes here. For Berry and for the universe story, this is science and this is deep religious truth. If we see this as purely an intellectual leap, an intellectual exercise, we miss the central point and we're stuck in our identity crisis. The journey of the universe is our journey. Before we existed in this form that you see before us here, we existed as parts of plants and animals and rocks and rivers and trees. The idea that the iron in my blood and the iron in this microphone, along with most of the elements in my body, were forged in the belly of a star billions of years ago, is part of our collective, our communal, and our family heritage. More, we continue to exist as the universe right now. It's not a past occurrence. You are still stardust, a quasar, a black hole. You are still gravity. I am still dark matter, whatever that is. Thank you for getting it. Christianity has not, by and large, absorbed these truths. And for Berry, it needs to. On a foundational level, Berry is pointing at the need for humanity to recognize that our true place in the story as the conscious aspect of the earth, or that is our true place. In terms of our relationship with the rest of the planet, we do not live on the earth. It is not our home. We are the earth. It is our macro self. This is what Berry says about it, quote, "Every individual self of the earth finds fulfillment in the great self of the earth, and beyond in the universe itself, as the primary and ultimate expression of that mystery out of which all things come and then return in full wonder of existence. The molecular, the cellular, the human are derivative. The universe is the primary self." This is the framework from which Berry says the great work of re-imaging our sense of self must flow. We are the universe woken up, evolved to consciousness. Again, this for Berry was both fundamental science and religion. Berry tells us that as we move forward to tell the story of the universe and combat the environmental devastation we are unleashing on ourselves, we must awaken from our identity crisis. And again, this crisis is cosmological in nature. When we look at this from the level of the earth, our conclusions take on deep ethical implications. If we are the Earth conscious of itself, as Berry says, then as we spew carbon into the atmosphere, we are hurting ourselves. This geocide, as Berry called it, is another form of suicide. And what I'm asking us today, what Berry is asking of us, what the universe is asking of us, is for us, in a sense, to become selfish. But we need to wake up first to the reality of the great self, our Earth self, our universe self. And this is why the success of the journey of the universe, the film, the publications, the conversations, the tours, and the website are so important. They present, for Berry, the only context within which to understand reality, and the best hope for finding a solution to the reality of our ecological crisis. The revelation of the new story upends our anthropology. It upends our theology. It upends our economics, jurisprudence, educational philosophies, and religious sentiments. Both Berry and the story call on us to free ourselves from wrong thinking and to come to the right understanding based on the greatest story ever told. It was, of course, from Teilhard that Berry learned to see the scientific story of the cosmic unfolding as a spiritual story. Of the universe story, Berry tells us, quote, "For the first time, the entire human community has, in this story, a single creation or origin myth. Although it is known by scientific observation, the story also functions as myth. In a special manner, it is the overarching context for any movement toward one creative interaction of peoples, cultures, and religion." So this story, the journey of the universe, is the context, he says, the overarching context for any religious or environmental movement. This cosmogenesis that we are still in the middle of course, contains within itself the most mysterious, most awesome, most powerful, and most joyful revelation that humanity, that the universe, has ever known. The universe, Berry informs us, is the primary religious reality, the primary sacred community, the primary revelation of the divine, and the primary unit of redemption. This primacy needs to be understood and accepted. This is also where I think we find that Berry is more radical, if that's possible, than Teilhard. It was, of course, Berry who made the connection between the new story and the devastation of the planet, between cosmology and the environment. This realization leads to a radical solution that is required of those aligned with religious traditions of the world, including Christians. That is, we need to change everything. This is what Larry Rasmussen, hi Larry, updating Walter Rauschenbusch, suggested in stating that we need to, quote, do our first works over, end quote. Christian ideas about creation, sin, grace, redemption, salvation, and ritual need to be reconstructed. And these and other ideas, however they come to be understood, need to be done within the context of the new story and the journey of the universe. Radical transformations like this, however, are not easy. I was giving a talk at CTSA a few years ago in Cleveland on Thomas Berry's work, and during the question session, a priest from Tanzania raised his hand and said he loved what Berry has written and liked the way I'd presented it. However, he said, Berry's turn to the cosmic Christ and cosmology itself as the primary source of revelation was so far beyond what his parishioners could handle that he feared it would never take root in his country. And I responded by saying that parishioners in my parish in Brooklyn, where I grew up, would also be greatly challenged by this. It was a very sobering exchange, actually. Still, we prod on. And we prod on because as the planet heats up, as the glaciers melt and sea levels rise, we can still prevent the worst-case scenario. We prod on because as the planet continues to change, we will need a spirituality for that change. We will need a worldview. We will need a plan rooted in the new story of how to think, how to relate, how to be community, and how to thrive on the new earth. Thomas Berry can be our guide and our prophet as we move into the future, but in truth, it is really the story that is our guide, our prophet, and our future. Thank you.
Thank you. What a fabulous panel, all of you. Time for a few questions. Again, make them short and brief, and then they'll answer all of them brilliantly. One over there.
Hi there, thank you. One of the big challenges of emphasizing the story is turning to the future, because the scientific story that's put forward for the future is rather grim. And I wondered if you could comment about how Barry and Teilhard took on that challenge of the future.
Don't take my husband's name in vain, though. Grim. Okay. Kusamita.
My question is especially for Heather Eaton. We speak of exteriority and interiority, and this is a spatial metaphor. What is outside, what is inside. My question is, how does this spatial metaphor arise? I don't know if this question can be answered, but I really want to know what you think. Thank you.
I'm just curious, where does economics flow into this and the thought of economists modern day? Because it seems we're two things we have to live with. One, capitalism doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And secondly, we seem intent to burn all the oil until it's gone or until we find a renewable source which is more economic.
So that's one of the reasons we like to say this is a trilogy. It's a film, it's a book, it's a series of conversations. 10 scientists talking about this, 10 environmentalists. One of the founders of ecological economics, Dick Norgaard from University of California, Berkeley, is speaking to this. He was deeply influenced by Thomas Berry. There's others like Gus Beth sitting in this room who are setting up a new economic institute and so on, and he will get the Thomas Berry Award later today precisely because he is following through on many of Berry's instincts that economics are at the heart of the matter and the problem too. So this has been a long time concern for Thomas, for others as well. But Dick Norgaard and his interview is really quite wonderful on ecological economics. Sorry, I had to answer the question. Maybe one more. Whitney.
Well, if our future is John Grimm, I'm very excited about it. So.
Me too.
Just to follow up on this idea of what the science says about the future, does it make a difference if we end up living in a multiverse?
Okay, with that biggie, anybody want to, Heather, do you want to respond to the space interior?
Yes. So this idea of exteriority and interiority, these are metaphors, right? There was just a way to say human consciousness pushes out to understand, but the more we push out to understand, the more we develop an interiority. So I appreciate it's understood spatially. And the only other way we could understand it is if we take Tom Berry's understanding that, and this is Teilhard as well, this developmental sequence of irreversible transformations. So space and time are, so the temporal and the spatial are these processes of increasing complexity and intensification and interiority, and they are intertwined together. And if we took an example from the processes of the Earth, the Mesozoic to the Cenozoic, these are, every time there's an extinction collapse, these are not internal processes of the Earth necessarily. I mean, there could be a volcanic eruption, but the Earth has a move. The biosphere moves towards increasing complexity. And it's a spatial and temporal intertwined image of expansion, but the expansion is interior and exterior, outward and inward. I was just trying to find a way that the more we learn about the universe, people feel quite disconnected. But you see, for Berry, the more we learn about the universe, the more connected we are, the more intimate it becomes. So what is that inner and outer journey? How can they be understood as part of one process? Yep.
I'd like to say something about the multiverse. I think we're already living in a multiverse. There are many, many ways to interpret Berry's stuff, as you could see, because, of course, he didn't write as a systematic theologian or a systematic anything, for that matter. So, you know, and also we are all products of our time, and thought goes on after us by other people. So I'm thinking there actually is a way to talk about Thomas Berry's stories and so on, and some of this is some of what I meant in my talk, that we're actually living in kind of entangled narratives that come from multiversal sorts of ways. And I think, we have to think rhetorically about what Thomas is saying. You want to lift up the story that nobody is telling and that is able to take us into the future. And so he's lifting up the new story as the story to take us into the future. But it enters through these tangled narratives and so on into which we're wandering, and of course we have to prioritize among them. So that's somehow how I would look at the multiverse. And I'm not sure if you meant the theory that we're living in millions of universes or infinite number of universes, but that's how I understood your question.
I'd just like to address that issue of the grim future predicted by science. Thomas Berry described the opening moments of the 21st century that we're in right now as a privileged moment in history, and he called it a moment of grace. So it's very easy for us to get sort of brought down by these doom and gloom environmental messages, but interacting with all of you here in this audience today, interacting with students, interacting with my own daughter, interacting with just about everyone and anyone, I'm filled with hope. I think that we are going to do something at this moment of grace. So I just want to say, don't get brought down by the grim message, right? And Thomas didn't promise us a ecozoic future. He didn't say that it will definitely happen, but this is our chance. We can make it happen.
I think in terms of the way distant future, in terms of the Earth exploding when the sun goes supernova kind of stuff, and how bad things might get eventually, in a real sense, Barry's answer would be focus on the task at hand. The great work is now in what we're doing and what we're not doing in many cases, and that's the focus. It's take the arrow out, address the suffering. And if we don't do that, we don't have to worry about the future.
That's true too. I just want to speak about this question about the grim future, which will include John, which will make it less grim, as we know. But if we think about optimism versus hope, so it's very, very difficult to be optimistic in many ways. If we think about the Cenozoic era, is it going to continue, and what is it going to look like in the future, and what species can be preserved, and the more ecological knowledge one has, the more difficult it is, and I think that's factual. But I do think that the issue of hope requires courage, and hope requires the letting go of the consequences of our actions. So John Hott this morning spoke about hope. And I don't think hope is a hope of another planet or resurrection, although I do say when I get resurrected, I want my 20-year-old body. That's the one I want. So if we have a choice of resurrections. But I mean, we have to think, our hopes are not very embedded in what is real here. And I think that's a greater act of courage, and also letting go of being optimistic, or what is it going to look like. So it's a bit of putting all our energy into a viable future. All of it. That's hope.
Thank you. I think that's a great note to end on. And it's a perfect transition after our break to where we're going. Because we're saying, as these panels have, we need new images of the divine, not out there, embedded here in a whole range of ways, but also what does this mean about seeds, about soil, about food. And the energy around food here at the Divinity School, thanks to James Jenkins and a lot of people, is extraordinary. And that's what brings us back to the embeddedness, along with water, and that panel with wonderful, wonderful people on it, and ending up today with the challenges of eco-justice. that is at the heart of the matter. And again, I think in the conversations you can see people dealing with these issues of energy, of economics, of cities, of education, and of farming, etc.